A woman in a black dress steps onto the Beirut promenade. Her heels click against wet pavement, her dark wig catching the Mediterranean breeze. She walks with the careful elegance of someone who belongs here, arm linked with her companion, laughing softly at some unheard joke. To the Lebanese police officer watching from across the street, they're just another couple enjoying the cool April night. What he doesn't know is that beneath the makeup and the dress, beneath the practiced smile and feminine walk, is Lieutenant Commander Ehud Barak, one of Israel's most lethal soldiers. And the 6 people walking behind them, disguised as tourists and lovers, are carrying enough firepower to start a war. Tonight, they're not here for the view. They're here to kill 3 men sleeping in their beds 5 blocks away. This is the story of how 13 commandos walked into the heart of enemy territory, dressed as women, executed 3 of the world's most wanted terrorists in their own apartments, and vanished into the night before anyone realized what had happened. This is Operation Spring of Youth, the most audacious assassination raid in modern history. If you want to hear more incredible stories about Mossad's most daring operations, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next on this channel. Every week, we bring you the untold missions that changed the Middle East forever. The night of April 9, 1973, was supposed to be quiet in Beirut. The city had settled into its evening rhythm, restaurants filling with late diners, couples strolling along the Corniche, music drifting from apartment balconies. In the affluent Verdun neighborhood, security was minimal. Palestinian officials lived here openly, protected not by walls or guards, but by the assumption that Israeli forces would never dare penetrate this deep into Lebanese territory. That assumption was about to be shattered in the most spectacular way possible. 5 months earlier, the world had watched in horror as Palestinian terrorists murdered 11 Israeli athletes at the Munich employees. The images burned into global consciousness. Masked gunmen on balconies, helicopters at the airport, bodies in the darkness. Israel's response was immediate and uncompromising. Prime Minister Golda Meir authorized Operation Wrath of God, a covert campaign to hunt down and eliminate every person connected to the Munich massacre. By April 1973, Mossad had already killed several targets across Europe, but the architects of Palestinian terrorism, the senior commanders who planned attacks from comfortable apartments in Beirut, remained untouched, protected by geography and Lebanese sovereignty that meant nothing to Israeli intelligence. 3 names topped the kill list: Kamal Adwan, the operations chief of Fatah, responsible for coordinating attacks inside Israel; Kamal Nasser, the PLO's official spokesman, whose words transformed terrorism into political theater; and Muhammad Youssef al-Najjar, known as Abu Youssef, Yasser Arafat's deputy and the financial brain funding the entire apparatus. These weren't foot soldiers or couriers. These were the men who made the decisions, who sent others to die while they lived in luxury behind the thin veil of Lebanese protection. And Mossad had been watching them for months. Understanding how the operation happened requires understanding who planned it. In early 1973, a Mossad agent codenamed Nielsen arrived in Beirut, posing as a British researcher working on a documentary about Lady Hester Stanhope, the eccentric aristocrat who'd lived in Lebanon a century earlier. The cover was perfect, innocent, academic, exactly the kind of foreigner who could wander Beirut asking questions without raising suspicion. Nielsen rented an apartment, established herself in expatriate circles, and began the patient work of surveillance. She wasn't just gathering addresses, she was mapping entire lives. What time did Adwan leave for morning prayers? Which cafes did Nasser frequent? How many bodyguards accompanied Abu Youssef when he traveled? She photographed buildings, counted floors, measured distances between apartments and street corners. She noted which windows stayed lit late into the night, which doors had reinforced locks, which neighbors might be security personnel in civilian clothes. Every detail was cataloged, encrypted, and transmitted back to Tel Aviv, where analysts built 3-dimensional models of the target zone. But surveillance alone wouldn't be enough. What Nielsen discovered changed everything. All 3 targets lived in the same neighborhood, within blocks of each other, in buildings that could be accessed from the street. No military compounds, no fortified bunkers, just ordinary apartment complexes where families slept and children played. The intelligence was almost too good to believe. It meant that a single team, moving fast enough, could hit all 3 locations in one night before Lebanese security forces could respond. The opportunity was unprecedented, but it carried enormous risk. Planning the operation fell to 31-year-old Ehud Barak, commander of Israel's elite Sayeret Matkal unit. Barak had built his reputation on impossible missions, the kind of operations that existed in the space between military precision and complete insanity. He'd led cross-border raids, hostage rescues, and deep reconnaissance missions that most commanders wouldn't dare attempt. But this was different. This wasn't the Golan Heights or the Sinai Desert. This was the capital of a sovereign nation, defended by police and military forces, surrounded by civilians who would call for help the moment anything seemed wrong. Barak rejected helicopters immediately. Too loud, too visible, too likely to alert Lebanese air defenses before the teams even reached their targets. Instead, he proposed something that seemed equally insane. Arrive by sea, infiltrate on foot, execute the mission, and extract before dawn. The plan required surgical timing, absolute silence, and a level of audacity that made even Mossad veterans nervous. Golda Meir listened to the proposal and gave her approval with a single sentence that would become legendary. There is no turning back. If we do it to the end. Training began immediately at a military facility in northern Tel Aviv. Israeli intelligence had constructed exact replicas of the target buildings using Nielsen's photographs and measurements. Every night for weeks, Commandos practiced the assault, timing each movement down to the second. They rehearsed climbing stairs, breaching doors, clearing rooms filled with mannequins positioned where intelligence suggested bodyguards would be sleeping. They practiced shooting in confined spaces, communicating through hand signals, moving through darkness without flashlights. Every scenario was war-gamed, every contingency planned. But the most unusual training had nothing to do with weapons or tactics. It involved wigs, dresses, and high heels. Barak had recognized the mission's greatest vulnerability, the 15-minute drive from the beach landing site to the target neighborhood. A convoy of military vehicles would be spotted immediately. Armed men walking in formation through Beirut streets would trigger every alarm in the city. But couples strolling hand in hand, tourists returning from dinner, women in evening dresses stepping out of luxury cars, that would blend perfectly into Beirut's cosmopolitan nightlife. So 13 commandos learned to walk like women. They practiced in makeup and dresses, adjusting their gaits, softening their movements, learning to project the casual confidence of people who belonged exactly where they were. It was humiliating and essential. The disguises didn't need to withstand close inspection. They just needed to pass at a glance, to give the teams precious seconds of invisibility as they moved through the city. Those seconds would mean the difference between success and catastrophe. Nielsen selected the landing site with the same meticulous care she'd applied to everything else. The private beach at the Sands Hotel offered restricted access, minimal security, and direct proximity to the hotel's parking lot, where Mossad agents could wait with rental cars. Lebanese authorities rarely patrolled the area at night. The beach's geography provided natural cover, rocks for concealment, deep water close to shore for the boats, and multiple escape routes if things went wrong. By early April, everything was ready. The commandos had trained until the operation became muscle memory. Mossad had positioned agents throughout Beirut under various covers: tourists, businessmen, journalists, all waiting for the signal. Safe houses had been established, escape routes mapped, communication protocols tested and retested. The weapons, specially modified for close quarters combat, were wrapped in waterproof containers ready for the sea crossing. Intelligence confirmed all 3 targets would be home on the night of April 9th. The final approval came through encrypted channels from Golda Meir's office. The operation was designated Spring of Youth, a name whose ironic beauty masked the violence it represented. On the afternoon of April 9th, Israeli missile boats departed Haifa port, carrying speedboats and 60 commandos divided into 3 teams. Team Aleph, led by Barak himself, would assault Abu Youssef's apartment. Team Bet would hit Kamal Nasser. Team Gimel would take down Kamal Adwan. Each team included a Mossad handler who'd been living in Beirut for weeks and knew every street, every checkpoint, every potential complication. Additional units would hit secondary targets: a Fatah headquarters building, weapons workshops, and a barracks housing Popular Front militants. This wasn't just an assassination mission. It was a decapitation strike designed to cripple PLO operations for months. As darkness fell over the Mediterranean, the boats cut their engines and drifted toward Lebanese territorial waters. Commandos checked weapons, adjusted disguises, ran through final briefings in whispers. Some carried silenced pistols, others held compact submachine guns, designed for room clearing. Explosive specialists prepared shaped charges for door breaching. Medics distributed morphine syringes and trauma kits. Every man knew the statistics. Operations this deep behind enemy lines had casualty rates approaching 50%. But they also knew something else. They were the best at what they did, and tonight, they were going to prove it. The speedboats launched at 2200 hours, skimming across dark water toward the faint glow of Beirut's coastline. No lights, no radio traffic, just the sound of engines and waves. Behind them, the missile boats maintained position at the 12-mile limit, ready to provide covering fire if extraction went wrong. Ahead, the city sparkled with oblivious normalcy. Cars moved along coastal roads. Apartment windows glowed warm against the night. Somewhere in that maze of light and shadow, 3 men were about to die, and they had absolutely no idea what was coming for them. The speedboats hit the beach at 2300 hours, engines dying as hulls scraped sand. Commandos moved with practiced silence, pulling boats into shadows beneath rocks, securing equipment, transforming themselves in seconds. Wigs adjusted, dresses smoothed, weapons concealed beneath clothing. Ehud Barak stood on Lebanese soil wearing a black evening gown, dark wig, and carefully applied makeup that softened his features just enough. His partner, another commando named Amnon, adjusted his own disguise while checking the silenced pistol hidden beneath his jacket. Around them, 12 other men completed the same surreal transformation. The rental cars arrived exactly on schedule, 6 vehicles driven by Mossad agents who'd been positioned in Beirut for weeks. The commandos split into pairs and groups, climbing into back seats while trying not to laugh at the absurdity of heavily armed men in dresses conducting a military operation. But the moment engines started and cars pulled onto the Corniche road, the humor evaporated. They were now inside enemy territory, with no backup, no air support, and no margin for error. The Lebanese army maintained checkpoints throughout the city. Police patrols cruised randomly. Any complication, any unexpected encounter, could collapse the entire operation into a firefight they couldn't win. The drive took 12 minutes. Beirut at night was everything Nielsen had described. Bustling restaurants, crowded sidewalks, couples walking hand in hand exactly as the disguised commandos now pretended to be. The cars moved with the flow of traffic, obeying speed limits, stopping at red lights, behaving like every other vehicle on the road. Inside, commandos sat rigid with tension, hands near concealed weapons, eyes scanning for threats. But the disguises worked perfectly. Lebanese police officers glanced at the cars and saw nothing unusual. Just another group of wealthy tourists enjoying Beirut's legendary nightlife. The convoy split at Rue Verdun, each team heading toward its designated target. Barak's team stopped 2 blocks from Abu Youssef's apartment building, a 6-story structure with balconies overlooking a quiet residential street. Intelligence indicated Abu Youssef lived on the 3rd floor with his wife Nadia and their young son. His security consisted of a single bodyguard sleeping in a room adjacent to the master bedroom. The building's front entrance remained unlocked at night, a casualness that would prove fatal. Barak shed the dress in the car, revealing combat fatigues underneath. The other commandos did the same, moving now with the lethal efficiency of soldiers trained for exactly this scenario. They approached the building on foot, weapons drawn, communicating through hand signals. A Mossad agent who'd been living in an apartment across the street for 3 weeks watched through binoculars, confirming via encrypted radio that the target was home, lights on in the 3rd floor apartment. The street was empty. Civilian foot traffic had dwindled. The moment was perfect. They entered the building at 2332. The stairwell smelled of cooking oil and cigarettes, ordinary domestic scents that created surreal contrast with what was about to happen. Barak led the team up carpeted stairs, each footstep measured, each breath controlled. At the 3rd floor landing, they paused outside apartment 3B. Behind that door, Muhammad Youssef al-Najjar sat at his desk reviewing documents, unaware that history was standing in his hallway. The bodyguard dozed on a couch in the adjacent room. Nadia was preparing tea in the kitchen. Their son slept peacefully in his bedroom. Barak tested the doorknob. Locked. He stepped aside as the explosive specialist placed a small shaped charge against the lock mechanism. The charge was designed for precision, enough force to blow the lock without collapsing the door or alerting the entire building. Everyone braced. The specialist triggered the device remotely. The explosion was barely louder than a cough, metal shearing as the lock disintegrated. The door swung open and commandos poured through in a choreographed sequence practiced 100 times. The bodyguard woke to the sound of footsteps and reached for his weapon, but 3 silenced rounds caught him in the chest before his fingers touched the grip. He died without making a sound, slumping against the couch as blood pooled beneath him. Abu Youssef heard the commotion and stood from his desk, reaching for a pistol in his drawer. Barak entered the study, and their eyes met across 3 meters of space. For one frozen second, Abu Youssef understood exactly what was happening. Then Barak fired twice, both rounds hitting center mass. Abu Youssef collapsed backward, papers scattering as he fell. Nadia screamed from the kitchen and ran toward the study. Commandos restrained her as she fought to reach her husband, her screams echoing through the apartment. The operations plan had been explicit: no collateral casualties unless necessary. Women and children were not targets. The commandos held Nadia until she stopped struggling, then carefully led her away from the body. Her son remained miraculously asleep through the chaos, spared from witnessing his father's execution. The entire assault had lasted 90 seconds. 3 blocks away, Team Bet was breaching Kamal Nasser's apartment with identical precision. Nasser lived alone, his security consisting of a driver who slept in a separate building. Intelligence had determined his apartment was on the 6th floor of a building with no elevator, requiring the team to climb stairs while maintaining silence. They accomplished this by moving in staggered formation, each commando pausing at landings to listen for movement before proceeding higher. Nasser's door proved more challenging. He'd installed a reinforced lock after receiving intelligence that Mossad was hunting PLO leaders in Europe. The shaped charge took longer to position, precious seconds ticking away as the team leader calculated the exact placement needed to breach without bringing down half the doorframe. When the charge blew, it was louder than planned, the explosion echoing through the stairwell. Nasser woke instantly, scrambling for the pistol he kept beneath his pillow. The commandos entered to find him standing in his bedroom doorway, weapon raised, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. For a moment, no one moved. Then Nasser pulled the trigger. His shot went wide, punching through the wall behind the lead commando's head. The return fire was instant and overwhelming. 8 rounds hit Nasser simultaneously, the impact throwing him backward into his bedroom, where he collapsed against the bed, blood spreading across white sheets. The team leader checked for pulse, found none, and signaled the all clear. 2 minutes, 40 seconds since breach. Team Gimel faced the most complicated target. Kamal Adwan lived in a fortified apartment with 2 bodyguards who rotated shifts, ensuring someone was always awake and armed. His building featured a doorman who monitored visitors, making direct approach impossible. The team's solution demonstrated the operation's careful planning. A female Mossad agent posing as a resident had been living in the building for 2 months. At 23:40, she approached the doorman with a fabricated story about locked keys and a plumber waiting upstairs. While he checked his records, she unlocked the service entrance, allowing Team Gimel to slip inside, undetected. Adwan's apartment was on the 4th floor, front door reinforced with steel plating, and a security camera monitoring the hallway. The team disabled the camera with a directed electromagnetic pulse, a piece of technology that wouldn't become common in civilian hands for another 30 years. The pulse fried the camera's circuitry without triggering alarms, giving them precious moments of invisibility. The door required heavier explosives. When the charge detonated, it blew the door off its hinges entirely, the steel slab crashing inward with a sound that woke half the building. The first bodyguard died instantly, caught in the explosion's shrapnel. The second managed to fire 3 rounds before commando bullets cut him down. Adwan emerged from his bedroom holding a Kalashnikov, spraying automatic fire blindly down the hallway. Rounds tore through walls, shattering windows, perforating furniture. The commandos dropped flat, returning fire with disciplined bursts that forced Adwan back into his bedroom. For 30 seconds, the apartment became a war zone, muzzle flashes strobing in darkness, cordite smoke filling enclosed spaces. Then, silence. Adwan had taken cover behind his bed, reloading. The team leader made a decision. They couldn't afford a prolonged firefight. Lebanese police were certainly en route. He pulled a fragmentation grenade from his vest, cooked it for 2 seconds, and threw it through the bedroom doorway. The explosion was deafening in the confined space, pressure blowing out windows and collapsing part of the ceiling. When the smoke cleared, Adwan lay motionless, his weapon fallen beside him. The team leader checked vitals, confirmed the kill, and radioed mission complete. 4 minutes, 18 seconds since breach. But the operation wasn't finished. While the assassination teams were executing their primary targets, 2 additional units had been hitting secondary objectives. One team assaulted a 6-story building housing Fatah headquarters, planting demolition charges that would bring down the entire structure. Another struck a weapons workshop where bomb makers assembled explosives for attacks inside Israel. The third targeted a PFLP barracks, killing several militants and destroying arms caches. The coordinated strikes created chaos across multiple neighborhoods simultaneously, overwhelming Lebanese security forces who couldn't determine which incidents to prioritize. The extraction plan was simple and terrifying. Everyone had 15 minutes to return to the beach before the boats departed, with or without them. Radio discipline was absolute. Teams communicated using prearranged code phrases that revealed nothing about locations or casualties. Spring flowers are blooming meant primary target eliminated. The garden needs water meant complications requiring support. Harvest time meant extract immediately. As the assassination teams completed their missions and began moving toward rally points, the radio crackled with variations of the same message. Spring flowers blooming, garden secured, harvest commencing. But complications were inevitable. At Adwan's building, neighbors had called police the moment they heard the explosion. 2 patrol cars arrived as Team Gimel was descending the stairs. The Commandos could hear sirens approaching, see flashing lights through windows. They couldn't use the front entrance without walking directly into Lebanese police. Instead, they exited through a rear window, climbing down a fire escape while bullets chipped concrete around them. One commando took a round through his shoulder, the impact spinning him against the railing. His teammates caught him, applied pressure to the wound, and half-carried him down the remaining flights. The getaway cars were supposed to be waiting at designated pickup points, but Lebanese police had begun establishing roadblocks across the Verdun neighborhood. One vehicle got stopped at a checkpoint where an officer demanded identification. The Mossad driver remained calm, producing a Lebanese passport that identified him as a local businessman. The officer studied the document while in the back seat. 3 commandos sat with hands on concealed weapons, ready to shoot their way through if necessary. After 30 seconds that felt like hours, the officer waved them through. They drove away slowly, obeying traffic laws, waiting until they'd rounded 2 corners before accelerating toward the beach. Barak's team encountered no resistance during extraction. They returned to their vehicle, changed back into civilian clothes, and drove calmly toward the corniche as if returning from dinner. Behind them, Abu Yusuf's building was coming alive with activity. Neighbors had heard Nadia's screams and called authorities. But by the time Lebanese security forces arrived and climbed to the 3rd floor, the only evidence of Israeli presence was spent shell casings and 3 dead bodies. No witnesses who'd seen faces. No security footage. Just the clinical efficiency of professional killers who'd vanished like smoke. The beach extraction became the operation's most vulnerable moment. All teams converging on a single location, exhausted commandos struggling through sand while carrying wounded, Lebanese military beginning to mobilize as they realized the attacks weren't random violence, but a coordinated assault. Israeli missile boats had moved closer to shore, ready to provide covering fire if ground forces appeared. The speedboats were already in the water, engines idling, pilots scanning the darkness for their passengers. Teams began arriving at 23:58, 2 minutes ahead of schedule. Commandos stripped off disguises and civilian clothes, reverting to combat fatigues as they waded into surf and climbed aboard boats. Weapons and equipment were secured. The wounded commando from Team Gimel was given morphine and stabilized by a field medic. Headcounts confirmed all personnel accounted for. No one captured, no one left behind. At midnight exactly, the last boat pushed off from Lebanese sand, engines roaring to life as they raced toward international waters. Behind them, Beirut's skyline glowed with emergency lights. Police sirens wailed across multiple neighborhoods. Lebanese military helicopters circled above the Verdun district, searchlights probing streets and buildings. At Fatah headquarters, the building's entire facade had collapsed, creating a pile of rubble that would take days to excavate. At the weapons workshop, secondary explosions continued as stored munitions cooked off, sending flames hundreds of feet into the night sky. And in 3 separate apartments, forensic teams were photographing crime scenes that told the same story. Professional execution, military precision, and a message Israel had delivered with bullets and blood. The speedboats reached the missile boats at 0030 hours on April 10th. Commandos climbed aboard to cheers from naval crews who'd been monitoring radio traffic and tracking the operation's progress. Barak removed his wig for the final time, tossed it into the Mediterranean, and allowed himself a smile. They'd accomplished something unprecedented, struck the heart of enemy territory, eliminated 3 high-value targets, and extracted without losing a single operator. The casualty ratio was absurd. 3 dead Palestinians, 0 dead Israelis. Success so complete, it seemed almost fictional. But as the boats turned toward Haifa, accelerating through dark water, one thought occupied every mind aboard. Lebanon would retaliate. The PLO would seek vengeance. The cycle of violence they'd just intensified would continue spinning. They'd won tonight's battle with overwhelming force and perfect planning. Yet, the war remained as distant and unresolved as ever, stretching endlessly into a future none of them could see, but all of them would inherit. The boats docked at Haifa port at 0300 hours, welcomed by military officials who'd been monitoring the operation from secure communication bunkers. Commandos disembarked carrying weapons and exhaustion in equal measure. The wounded operator was transferred to an ambulance that sped toward Rambam Hospital, his injury classified as training accident to maintain operational security. Debriefings would come later. For now, they were given hot food, clean clothes, and 12 hours of mandatory rest before intelligence officers would begin extracting every detail of what had happened in Beirut. Ehud Barak remained awake, sitting in a quiet corner of the naval facility while replaying the operation in his mind. Every decision, every movement, every second where things could have collapsed into disaster. Abu Yusuf's face in that final moment, the bodyguard reaching for his weapon, Nadia's screams echoing through the apartment. These images would stay with him for decades, not as trauma, but as reference points, lessons carved into memory through violence. He'd led men into the heart of enemy territory and brought all of them home alive. By any military standard, the operation was flawless. Yet something gnawed at him, a disquiet he couldn't articulate even to himself. In Beirut, dawn revealed the full scope of what had occurred. Lebanese authorities cordoned off multiple crime scenes across the city, establishing perimeters that couldn't contain the crowds gathering to witness the aftermath. At Abu Yusuf's apartment building, residents stood in shocked silence, staring at bloodstains in the stairwell and bullet holes in walls. Police investigators photographed evidence while trying to reconstruct how foreign soldiers had penetrated Lebanese territory, executed coordinated assassinations, and vanished without leaving witnesses or casualties of their own. The Fatah headquarters building had been reduced to rubble, its collapse so complete that rescue workers initially believed a gas explosion had caused the destruction. Only after finding traces of military-grade explosives did they understand the truth. This wasn't an accident. This was a message written in demolished concrete and twisted steel. Israel had reached into Lebanon and struck with a force that demolished any illusion of safety. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. If Israel could kill senior PLO leaders in their own beds, surrounded by civilian populations in the capital of a sovereign nation, then nowhere was safe. Lebanese Prime Minister Saab Salam convened an emergency cabinet meeting at dawn, demanding answers his security chiefs couldn't provide. How had Israeli forces infiltrated Beirut undetected? How many operators had been involved? Where had they entered and exited? The questions cascaded without satisfactory responses. Intelligence agencies had detected nothing. Border patrols had reported no unusual activity. Coastal defenses had observed no vessels. It was as if ghosts had materialized, killed with surgical precision, and dissolved back into darkness. International reaction divided along predictable lines. Arab nations condemned the operation as state terrorism, a violation of Lebanese sovereignty and international law. The Arab League called for emergency sessions. Syrian President Hafez al-Assad delivered a speech promising retaliation. Egyptian media published front-page photographs of the destroyed buildings, alongside editorials demanding coordinated Arab response. But beneath the official outrage was something else: fear. If Israel could strike Beirut this effectively, Damascus and Cairo were equally vulnerable. The operation had fundamentally altered the calculus of the conflict. Western nations maintained studied silence. The United States issued a bland statement expressing concern about regional stability, while privately congratulating Israeli intelligence on operational excellence. European governments publicly called for restraint, while their intelligence services dissected the raid for lessons applicable to their own covert operations. The British SAS was particularly interested in the disguise methodology and extraction timing. French intelligence requested debriefings through back channels, seeking to understand how Mossad had coordinated multiple simultaneous assaults with such precision. Within Israel, the operation remained classified for 72 hours. Military censors blocked all media coverage, threatening editors who attempted to report on suspicious troop movements or the sudden unavailability of certain special forces units. But whispers spread through military circles and government offices. Something major had happened. Something that would reshape Israel's strategic position. When Prime Minister Golda Meir finally authorized public disclosure, she did so with characteristic bluntness during a televised address that became legendary. Israel will not wait for its enemies to strike first, she declared, standing at a podium with Israeli flags behind her. We will reach our enemies wherever they hide, in whatever country shelters them, and we will eliminate the threats they pose to our citizens. This is not aggression. This is survival. The speech was met with standing ovations in the Knesset and spontaneous celebrations in Tel Aviv's streets. Israelis who'd lived under constant threat of PLO attacks felt, for the first time in months, that their government was fighting back effectively. The funerals in Beirut attracted thousands. Abu Youssef was buried in a cemetery overlooking the Mediterranean, his coffin draped in Palestinian flags and carried through streets lined with mourners. Kamal Nasser's funeral became a political rally, speakers promising vengeance while crowds chanted slogans against Israel. Kamal Adwan was interred with full military honors, his body displayed in an open casket so mourners could witness the wounds inflicted by Israeli bullets and grenades. The symbolism was deliberate, martyrs whose deaths would inspire the next generation of resistance. Yasser Arafat, who'd survived only because he was traveling abroad during the raid, returned to Beirut 3 days later. He visited each assassination site, standing in the blood-stained apartments where his closest advisors had died. Associates described him as shaken, but defiant, vowing that the PLO would rebuild and retaliate. At a press conference broadcast across the Arab world, he delivered a speech that mixed grief with determination. They can kill our leaders, but they cannot kill our cause. For every martyr, 10 more will rise. Israel's brutality only strengthens our resolve. But privately, Arafat understood what the operation represented. Israel had demonstrated capabilities that fundamentally changed the conflict's dynamics. The PLO could no longer operate openly anywhere within Israeli reach. Leaders would need to live in hiding, constantly moving, trusting no one. The organizational structure would have to become more decentralized, more compartmentalized, more paranoid. The days of senior commanders living in comfortable Beirut apartments were finished. Survival now required the kind of operational security usually associated with intelligence agencies, not political movements. The intelligence community's assessment of Operation Spring of Youth became the subject of classified studies across multiple nations. CIA analysts noted the operation's risk-to-reward ratio, enormous danger justified by strategic impact that eliminated key enemy leadership while demonstrating reach and capability. MI6 focused on the infiltration methodology, particularly the use of deep cover agents positioned months in advance to provide real-time intelligence. Soviet KGB studied the operation with professional admiration, mixed with concern about potential Israeli capabilities in other regions. Within Mossad, the raid became a training template. Every aspect was documented, analyzed, and incorporated into future operational planning. The disguise techniques were refined. The timing protocols were codified. The extraction procedures were practiced until they became doctrine. But the operation also revealed vulnerabilities that intelligence chiefs found disturbing. They'd succeeded partly through luck, the targets happening to be home, Lebanese security being complacent, extraction occurring before effective response could be organized. Future operations might not benefit from such favorable conditions. Ehud Barak received a commendation that remained classified for 30 years. The citation praised his leadership, tactical judgment, and ability to execute complex operations under extreme pressure. Within military circles, his reputation transformed from respected officer to legendary commando. The raid became his defining achievement, the operation by which all others would be measured. Years later, as Chief of General Staff and eventually Prime Minister, people would reference the Beirut raid as proof of his strategic brilliance and operational courage. But the human cost of such operations remained largely hidden. The commandos who'd participated returned to their units carrying psychological weight they couldn't discuss with families or therapists bound by security clearances. Some developed insomnia, replaying the mission in endless mental loops. Others experienced delayed emotional responses, moments of unexpected grief or guilt triggered by random stimuli. The military provided no formal support for such reactions. Operators were expected to compartmentalize, to treat killing as professional duty rather than moral crisis. One commando later described the contradiction in anonymous testimony to a military psychologist. "We trained to be perfect soldiers, to follow orders without question, to eliminate targets efficiently, and we did exactly that. But nobody trained us for the moment after. When you're standing in someone's apartment, surrounded by their family photos and children's toys, and there's blood on your hands that won't wash off, no matter how long you scrub. They teach you how to kill. They don't teach you how to live with having killed." The PLO's retaliation came in waves over the following months. Attacks against Israeli targets intensified across Europe and the Middle East. In Athens, gunmen opened fire on an El Al airliner boarding passengers, killing 3. In Rome, terrorists threw grenades into a crowded airport terminal. In Cyprus, a ferry carrying Israeli tourists was targeted with rocket fire. Each attack was claimed as vengeance for the Beirut raid, part of an escalating cycle where each side's violence justified the other's response. Lebanese politics fractured further under the strain. Christian factions blamed Palestinian groups for bringing Israeli wrath upon Lebanon. Muslim communities sympathized with Palestinian resistance, while resenting the instability it created. The fragile sectarian balance that had maintained Lebanese governance began cracking under pressure that would eventually explode into civil war. The raid hadn't just killed 3 men. It had destabilized an entire nation's political equilibrium. Historians would later identify Operation Spring of Youth as a turning point in modern asymmetric warfare. It demonstrated that state actors could conduct targeted assassinations abroad with minimal diplomatic consequences if executed skillfully. The operation established precedents that other nations would follow. American drone strikes in Pakistan and Yemen, Russian poisonings in London, Saudi operations in Istanbul. The legal and ethical frameworks justifying such actions often reference the Beirut raid as foundational example. The 3 dead PLO leaders were eventually replaced by men who learned from their predecessors' mistakes. New operational security protocols emerged. Leaders stopped living in fixed locations. Communication became more encrypted and compartmentalized. The organizational structure evolved to survive decapitation strikes by ensuring no single leader possessed irreplaceable knowledge or authority. Paradoxically, Israeli success in eliminating leadership accelerated the PLO's transformation into a more resilient, distributed network harder to disrupt through targeted killings. 6 months after the raid, Mossad conducted an internal assessment evaluating the operation's long-term impact. The conclusion was sobering: tactical success, strategic ambiguity. They'd eliminated 3 senior commanders, but hadn't meaningfully degraded PLO capabilities. Attacks against Israeli targets had actually increased in frequency and sophistication. The organization had adapted rather than collapsed. The raid had demonstrated Israeli power while revealing its limitations. You could kill leaders indefinitely, but that didn't kill the movement they represented. Ehud Barak himself would later reflect on this paradox in interviews conducted decades after the operation was declassified. "We were soldiers, following orders, executing missions designed by politicians and intelligence chiefs. We did our jobs perfectly, but military perfection doesn't translate to political solution. We could raid Beirut 100 times, kill 1,000 terrorist leaders, and the fundamental conflict would remain unresolved. That's the tragedy of it. We were so good at war that we forgot war couldn't actually solve what we were fighting about." The Sands Hotel beach where Commandos had landed became a pilgrimage site for military history enthusiasts. Lebanese authorities installed no marker or memorial, but those who knew the story could stand on that sand and imagine 13 men in dresses, climbing from speedboats, about to execute one of the most audacious military operations in modern history. The hotel itself was destroyed during Lebanon's civil war, leaving only foundations and memories of the night foreign soldiers walked invisible through Beirut's heart. The operation's legacy extended far beyond the immediate participants. It influenced how nations conceived covert operations, how terrorist organizations structured themselves, and how international law grappled with state-sponsored assassinations. Legal scholars still debate whether the raid constituted legitimate self-defense or criminal violation of sovereignty. The answer depends entirely on whose perspective you adopt, which side of the conflict you consider legitimate. What remains undeniable is the operation's technical excellence. The planning, training, execution, and extraction represented military professionalism at its highest level. 13 men penetrated enemy territory, accomplished multiple objectives simultaneously, and returned without casualties. By purely operational standards, it was a masterpiece of Special Forces doctrine. Whether such brilliance served any meaningful strategic purpose beyond demonstrating capability is a different question, one that remains unresolved 50 years later.